What is going on? It's Sunday, September 25th. And lately, I haven't had a lot of time to myself because I've been packing, because I'm moving. But I have had a lot of time to think. And usually when there's time to think, you can expect a thought of the day. And today's thought of the day is about the 3-foot world. And I'm reading a book right now by a guy named Mark Owen. And Mark Owen was a Navy SEAL who was on the raid to kill UBL, Osama bin Laden. And Mark Owen wrote a book called No Easy Day. And in this book, he talked about his first-hand account of his involvement in the raid and on the mission to go into Pakistan and hit that compound. But Mark Owen also wrote a sequel to his book, which he called No Hero, The Evolution of a Navy SEAL. I don't know if you can see that, but in his book, No Hero, he talks about the principles that shaped and formed him over the course of his 14-year SEAL career. He talks about principles like trust, respect, accountability, communication, and the little golden nuggets that he picked up on along the way over his career. And one of the chapters, he talks about fear. And at this point, he had been a Navy SEAL for about 4 years, but he still hadn't mastered his intense fear of heights. And his unit was getting ready to deploy to Iraq. And at the back end of their training cycle, they were scheduled to go out to Red Rock Canyon outside of Las Vegas. They were going to learn how to lead climb and how to set up their own protection or pro gear. And it's funny, like in this book, he's like, I wasn't thinking about falling or my intense fear of heights when I signed up for the trip. I was just thinking about downtime and blowing off steam before deploying. And so like from the get-go, you could tell his mind wasn't even there, right? But he said they got there at night and they got to enjoy all that Las Vegas had to offer. And after a night of rest, or really like a quick nap, they got in their rental cars and they headed out to Red Rock Canyon where they were going to meet their instructors. And he said their instructors watched in awe as they pulled out like top shelf gear from their rental cars. Because the Navy had bought the best gear that money could buy and they hired the best instructors. But they had none of the skills required for what they were about to do. So they were completely out of their league. But they met their instructors and he described them as like these ratty, beach bum looking guys with dingy shorts and shirts and like scraggly hair. And they had like leathery, sun-kissed skin and calloused hands from hours on the rock face. These guys, these rock climbers, they're like inherently poor because everything they do when it comes to training and teaching, they just pour all their money right back into the sport that they love. That's their passion. So they meet these guys and they get paired up 2-to-1, two SEALs to one instructor. And they were going to go and learn the basics for the first couple of days. And him and his other newbie SEAL named Jeff got paired up with an instructor who he described as like this short, stocky dude who had like a long goatee, who had like scraggly brown hair under this North Face beanie. And he had the strongest handshake he had ever felt in his life. This is a Navy SEAL talking, right? And they found out over like the course of breaks and taking like smoke breaks with this guy that he had been an ex-con who went to jail for beating up the guy who was having sex with his wife, right? So this guy was like just super instructor, super rock climber. And the first couple of days, they were taught how to, like I said, they were going to set up their pro gear and they were getting refreshed on the basics of rock climbing. And those 2 days, they were taught to place their cams in at every 10 feet. And these cams were these devices that they put into the cracks and crevices of the rock face so that if they were to fall, their rope would be pulled taut and it would catch them on the cams. So they got led to on the third day, the climbing instructor took them to the big climb. And at this point, Mark Owen was like, I was too nervous to talk. He said, the shadow of this rock face seemed to stretch out for like miles. And he said, I didn't want to look up because this mountain was so tall that it was blotting out the sun. And he looked at this rock face and he's like, it's just a brown sheet of glass, essentially. So he was completely out of his league and he was still nervous and he still hadn't mastered that fear of heights. But his instructor looks at him and he's like, you're first, let's go. And he's like, okay. So he starts climbing and he gets into a rhythm and he's got his climbing partner, Jeff, below him, belaying his climb. And he's leading up and he's finding the hand and footholds and he's making his way up to the top. He was taught to put in those cams at every 10 feet, but that made him a little nervous because that means if he were to fall and the closest cam was 10 feet under him, he would have to fall 20 feet until he was caught. But if he placed that cam wrong, he didn't want to think about falling another 10 feet, 30 feet, because that could mean death. So he started putting in his cams at every 5 feet. And he's like, yep, every 5 feet works great. That makes me feel good. So he's climbing up this rock face, which is more than 400 feet up in the air. And he's putting in his cams at a rate that's too fast for the pace he's going. So after about 250 feet, he runs out of cams. And he was officially stuck. And for the first time, he started looking around. He started looking down. He started looking at Las Vegas out in the horizon. And he realizes to himself, he's like, dude, I'm like really high up. And then he starts to get nervous. And then he starts to kind of get a little fatigued. He starts to lose his hand and rock footholds. And he's like, my mind and my body were like in a full-on civil war. My mind was telling me to keep going, but my body refused. And he's like, I was losing my focus, my front sight focus, a lot like my hold on the rock. And in this book, he talks about front sight focus. When SEALs shoot, they focus on the front sights of their pistols. Because if it's in focus, the bullet's going to hit. But if it's not in focus, you're going to miss. Simple as that. So he was losing his front sight focus. And he was like totally everywhere but there. And he totally forgot about his instructor because he'd catch him sometimes catching around, like climbing around like Spider-Man. And he said, my billy goat instructor, he kind of scampered up next to me. And what he had done was he had gone below him and collected all the unneeded cams. And across his chest on his harness were dangling all the cams that he put in too quickly. And he did it all without any pro gear or ropes of his own. This guy was just like free climbing all around him. And that didn't give Mark Owen any peace of mind either. And this guy climbs up to Mark Owen. He leans in and he's got a cigarette dangling from his mouth. And he takes in a big drag of his cigarette and he puffs out a puff of smoke. And he leans into Mark Owen and he goes, hey man, in like this lazy, raspy voice. He goes, just stay in your 3-foot world. And Mark Owen's like, I'm like 250 feet up in the air. I'm totally frozen. And I can't decipher this guy's cryptic advice. What does he think, we're doing up here? And he goes, what the hell are you talking about, bro? And his instructor goes, just focus on your 3-foot world. Focus on the things you can affect. You keep looking around. But none of that shit is going to help you right now, can it? And Mark Owen shakes his head no. And he goes, you're looking down and you're calculating how far you're going to fall. You're looking down at Jeff, your instructor buddy or your climbing buddy. He's not going to help you either. You're looking out at the strip. What are you going to do? Gamble your way to the top? This is your mountain. Don't look at me. I'm not going to help you either. You're climbing this rock. Stay in your 3-foot world. And Mark Owen goes, I'll never forget those words. Stay in your 3-foot world. And now he's reloaded with cams and he puts one into the nearest crevice and he starts back up again. He starts climbing. And he said his focus never went any farther than his next hand or foothold. And he said, all the beauty of the desert, the Las Vegas desert, and the strip out on the horizon, Las Vegas Strip, it was all lost on me. But I could tell you every detail of every crevice and every crack on that rock face. He said, I was surprised when I had made it to the top and my hand was over the lip. It just shocked me. And he said, I left that trip with a new perspective. Staying in my 3-foot world became a mantra for me. And I'm thinking to myself as I'm reading this, I'm like, that's so true. Because it's liberating once you focus on the things that you can affect and you just forget the things that you can't. And this new concept of staying in your 3-foot world is something that can be applied to like basically everything. So the takeaway here is, when you look too far into the future. Like Mark Owen, he was looking too far down. He was looking 250 feet down and he got paralyzed. It's called analysis paralysis. That can happen to you. If you look 250 feet into the future, that can happen. You can start thinking about things that you have no control over, and that could stop you from moving forward. But if you come back and you focus on your 3-foot world, focus on the things that you can affect, then you start making the decisions that are necessary to move forward. That's the thought of the day. I look forward to talking with you next week. Until then, stay in your 3-foot world. I'll talk to you later.